All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to break down a really complex and frankly controversial theory that's laid out in this dossier we've been looking at. Now, just to be clear, our job here isn't to say if it's true or false. We're just here to unpack the narrative itself to show you what it's actually claiming. So let's start with the big one, the core idea. So right off the bat, you get this quote. And wow, this is basically the entire argument in a nutshell. The dossier is saying that what we all went through wasn't just a public health program. It's arguing it was a bio-digital convergence assault. I mean, that's a huge claim, right? So let's dig into how they even try to build that case, starting with who they say were the main players. Okay, so the dossier has this term for it, the master stack. The idea is that this whole thing was a coordinated effort between some very specific, very powerful companies and government players. It's not random. According to this theory, every single entity had a job to do, a critical piece of the puzzle. Let's start at the top, or maybe the bottom, the foundation of it all. First up, DARPA. The Pentagon's Wild Science Lab. The dossier basically says they're the ones who planted the seeds for all of this. It points to their past projects, like the N3 Neurotech program and something called the Pandemic Prevention Platform, as the R&D that cooked up the core technologies. And the claim is DARPA didn't just throw money at ideas. No, it alleges they were hands-on, directing the early tests of mRNA and even building the tech framework to use AI to control the story. This is where it gets really interesting. The dossier zeroes in on Elon Musk, but it doesn't look at his companies, SpaceX, Neuralink, XAI, as separate things. Not at all. It frames them as one single integrated machine. You've got Starlink for grabbing data from all over the globe, Neuralink for creating a potential brain-based ID, and then XAI to build the AI that polices this whole network. The key takeaway, according to the source, is this seamless flow from our biology to satellites to a brain chip. All right, next up on the list is Sam Altman. In this narrative, his job is to build the identity layer. The dossier connects the dots between OpenAI, which it says is for controlling the narrative, and WorldCoin, which, is all about scanning eyeballs for a global biometric ID. The end game here, according to the theory, was to get every single person on the planet signed up for a digital identity that's tied directly to both AI and your own biological data. For something this huge, if you believe the theory, you need a serious digital infrastructure, right? Well, the dossier points the finger directly at the big tech giants. It claims Oracle was the one that built the Claude system to track every single person who got the shot in real time. It says Amazon's AWS was hosting Moderna's whole mRNA design process, that Google's DeepMind used its AI to help with that design, and Microsoft was laying the groundwork for digital health passports with its ID 2020 project. So, you've got the data and the ID, but you need the muscle. The dossier calls this group the enforcers and accelerators. It claims Palantir basically took its AI from the battlefield and pointed it at public health here at home. It brings up IBM's Watson Health for tracking vaccine injuries, and it makes sure to remind you of IBM's, let's just say, controversial history with tracking people. And of course, none of this AI stuff happens without massive computing power, and that's where NVIDIA comes in, providing the GPUs to make it all run lightning fast. The last big corporate piece of this alleged puzzle is what the dossier calls the cognitive layer, and for that, it points to Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. The claim is that Meta worked hand in glove with government agencies to basically manage what people were saying and thinking online, censoring dissent. And here's a detail that really shows you the depth of this theory. It connects Facebook's origin story to an old, shut-down DARPA project called LifeLog, suggesting Facebook just picked up where DARPA left off, creating a giant, searchable database of our lives. Okay, let's pull all that together for a second. This table is a pretty good summary of what the dossier calls the master stack. Just take a look. You can see how each company is given a very specific role in this alleged system. DARPA originates the tech. Musk and Altman provide the hardware and the ID layer. The big tech giants build the plumbing and surveillance. It's all laid out. According to the dossier, this is the complete corporate blueprint. But that's just one side of the coin. What about the political side? Right. Let's shift gears now into the second part of this. The dossier doesn't just focus on corporations, it spends a lot of time on the political angle. And it really hones in on one person in particular, Donald Trump. The argument is that he played this incredibly specific and kind of complicated dual role in the whole thing. So check this out. This is the core of their argument about Trump's role. On one side, the dossier paints him as the main guy, the perpetrator. He's the one who greenlit Operation Warp Speed, called the shots miracles. But then, on the other side,
It claims he was also building his escape hatch, a plausible denial strategy. Later trying to shift the blame to older vaccines, creating this whole story where he was both the hero who saved the world and a victim who was tricked. The key point the dossier makes is that this wasn't him being confused, it was a strategy.
And this timeline here really helps put that alleged strategy into perspective. You see the launch of Warp Speed, the rollout. Then, as the lawsuits and bad press start piling up, you see this key moment in 2025. Trump reposts some old video about thimerosal. Now, to you and me, that might seem random, but the dossier sees it as a narrative detonation, a calculated move to get people angry about something else, to steer the conversation away from the very technology he pushed. To explain this whole strategy, the source even invents its own term for it. They call it the Mirrorlock Protocol. It's a bit of jargon, but the idea is pretty simple. They're saying that by playing both sides, anytime the main actor, Trump in this case, tries to say, hey, it wasn't me, it actually does the opposite. It just digs him in deeper, reinforcing his role at the center of it all. It's a pretty wild concept. All right, so we have this whole web of alleged corporate and political players. How does the dossier try to frame all of this as actual, crimes? Well, it lays out what it considers to be the legal case, and it points to some very specific laws. And they get really specific here. The dossier starts listing off statutes that it claims were broken. Stuff like U.S. law on biological agents, the Rome Statute on crimes against humanity, even the Geneva Convention on medical experiments. It even brings in things like GDPR data rules and a specific state law from Minnesota. Now, it's super important to stress this. These are the claims from the dossier. They're allegations, not proven facts in a court of law. Okay, we've gone through the corporate stock, the political piece, and the supposed legal case. So now let's pull it all together into the dossier's grand finale, the big picture conclusion, what it calls the grand synthesis. This right here is what the dossier says is the grand design, a 5-layer assault. Let's walk through it real quick. It starts with layer 1, the mRNA itself, the synthetic body layer. That plugs into layer 2, the Internet of Bodies, which is basically a giant biosensor grid. All that data gets managed by layer 3, AI, the cognitive enforcement part. Layer 4 is the cloud, where everything's stored and controlled. And finally, layer 5 is how you access the system, using things like WorldCoin as your digital ID token. You see, the dossier's whole point is that this isn't 5 separate things. It's one fully integrated system, from top to bottom. And that really brings us to the final, ultimate conclusion of this whole dossier. It argues, pretty bluntly, that none of this was an accident. It wasn't a clumsy response to a crisis. Instead, it claims this was the deliberate rollout of a pre-planned, technocratic design. So, look, whether you believe a single word of this dossier or think it's the most far-fetched thing you've ever heard, that's not really the point right now. The fact that a narrative like this even exists, one that can so intricately connect all these pillars of our modern world, our tech, our leaders, our institutions, into one giant hidden architecture of control, that forces you to ask a bigger question. What does a story like this tell us about our trust in the very systems that run our lives? It's definitely something to think about.